Welcome everyone to the Vintage Sewing Machine Garage. Welcome if you're new, or welcome back if you're a member of my channel or just someone who stops by and watches the videos. I wanted to make a video today to talk about European machines and why they cost more to service. And this is something I've been doing for quite some time, and it began probably with the first Bernina I ever serviced. But most European brands and models, whether it is the Swiss brands Bernina or Elna, German brands like Kaiser Gritzner or Pfaff, which is one of the most more famous of the brands from Germany. There were others. And this is also true of quite a few of the Italian neckies, although not as many of the neckies. There are neckies that are simpler to work on, less time consuming, but again, there are just many exceptions to this, and I really would have to talk about those on a model-by-model basis. But for the other brands, they typically take longer to service, and I have to charge more for them. And if you ever go to have one serviced, you may discover that, let's say you took a vintage Singer in for service, and you found someone to service it. You get a certain price quote. If you took a European machine in, again, I can't vouch for every service center in the country, but I would say by and large you're going to pay more on average for that service. And this is just my observation over 9 years of having serviced sewing machines, restored them, overhauled them, gone through them, and I've discovered that that basically I have to charge more. So for example, I'm working on this machine. This is not my machine to sell, it belongs to a client. And if I'm servicing a Singer straight stitch machine, not counting any parts that need to be replaced, just for the labor, I'm usually around $150 to $175, which is pretty good considering I'm going through the whole machine. And again, I'm doing this as a hobby. I don't have a retail location to pay rent on. When you're going to a service center, yes, they do charge a lot of money, probably a ridiculous amount. Part of that may be as a disincentive to get you to service your old machine because they'd love to sell you a new one. But other times it's because it is more labor intensive. And I'm going to kind of show you guys a few things to be aware of when that's going on. Now, first of all, I got the machine in, and I don't know if it's been used in a while, maybe somewhat, but I wanted to show you guys, this is the foot pedal. It's a Pfaff foot pedal. And you'll notice that it says, what does it say that? I'll show you the machine in a minute, you'll see. But this foot pedal is electronic, right? And by the time this machine was made, they had gone to electronic foot pedals, which is kind of nice in some ways. They do have a lifespan, but I think, this one, we're going to test it out, make sure it's working. It says made in Western Germany, so we know that this was made before the fall of the Berlin Wall. And if I get my light out here, I'll show you a couple of things. This is true of all foot pedals, whether electronic or not, but if I shine a light in here, that we got some dust bunnies, a little feather there. But all of that will get vacuumed out and cleaned. That's the main thing we need to do for that. And I also wanted to go over just different areas of the machine and try to explain why it takes more time. And I'll start with some of the design features, and you see this in a lot of Italian design, but you also see it in the Swiss machines and the German machines. Now I'm going to move, I can't get my tripod any higher here, so I'm going to move here. I'm just going to kind of hold this and show it to you guys. So let's say you've got this case, let's say you bought the machine, right? Or somebody brings it to you and you want to open the case. A lot of times, vintage sewing machine cases often have a few latches. Usually it'll be, on the right or left, and they're usually very simple. I never carry a machine by its handle. It stresses the handle because the vintage ones are very heavy. And also, I don't want to stress the latches. I realize that they're there for carrying, but I like to carry them with my hands underneath, and I suggest you always do that. But this is an example of design that is both clever and potentially problematic, and I'll show this to you. So when I got this, I was asking the client, how do you open the case? Because I knew if I didn't ask, I would need to be experimenting, and I don't want to do that. These are plastic latches. Well, if you try to turn them, they don't turn, they don't pull, they don't really move. Now, if you're an impatient person, or you don't realize that there's a method to this, you could easily damage it. But, and the owner showed me this because they already knew, I would have had to gone and gone onto YouTube and looked at the video to see, because I haven't opened this case before. If you push here and then swing, then you've unlocked the case's hold on the base of the machine. And of course, we'll go over here and do the same thing, right? But if you don't know that, you could end up damaging the machine, right? And this is no different than a knob or a dial or a lever on the front of a machine. And I've made videos for you all before talking to you about how never to force anything. If it's giving you resistance, either it's stuck because of old oil, or in this case, you're not operating it correctly, and if you don't, you can cause damage, and that would really hurt, to think that you damaged your own machine. So just a helpful hint. It seems simple, but it's not until you realize that it's a very clever design. It's very aesthetic, and it may be useful for keeping children from opening this. But it's also an easy place where you could damage the machine. Now this case, of course, has places to store thread, and it's got all kinds of storage here, but that's neither here nor there. We're going to pull this up, and when I do, you will see the machine that we're going to talk about as an example. Again, this is not a purchase series video. I did not buy this machine. And we're going to talk a little bit about what it is that draws people to European brands, and what are the things to look for as compared to, say, a Japanese or an American-made singer period from the vintage era. I'm going to move our electronic foot pedal out of the way because I don't want it to be damaged. You never want to drop any foot pedal, and that's certainly true of electronic pedals. So we're going to keep that safe and sound. This is the FOF 1222E. I suspect that it's a 1980s machine. Notice it says electronic, and just like earlier machines in the 60s when they first started using electronic speed control, notice it has this sort of atomic symbol. I guess it was a symbol of technology in some shape or form. And you guys have seen me talk about other vintage machines before, right? And I've covered them and shown you how to access. Some of them are wonderfully friendly to access and do maintenance on, and some of them are not. And we'll kind of look at some of the things we need to be aware of. First of all, the FOF brand. I'm going to take off the little deck. This machine has its original sewing deck, and it's made of it's metal. I'm going to assume that it's made of steel, or excuse me, aluminum, because it's not as heavy as you might imagine it could be. Okay, so in looking at the machine, some of this will not be terribly difficult. The manual, which I have downloaded, is a great guide. And as machines start to get more complex, as you go through the vintage era, it can often take more time to kind of go through the machine, get familiar with it, because again, you want to know, how is this thing working? How is it designed to work? And for example, decorative stitches are here, so you have to, there's not a label that says open me, so you have to kind of, again, use your manual, because if you're not sure, you don't want to do something by mistake with these machines. Okay, so we have all sorts of controls on the front here that control zigzag, the length, the width of the zigzag, and again, I'm not going to go through and talk about how the machine is used, because that's really a different video. And any of you who have the manual, that's the best way to learn the machine. Is if the illustrations are bad, you can certainly go to YouTube and look at videos. So you have power switches and things, but I wanted to mainly talk about the fact that you want to make sure you have the right bobbins. I'll check to see if this uses the M style, M like Mary, or if it uses a class 15, because some of the FOFs share the M class bobbin with the Swedish Husqvarna or Vikings if you're in the US. And again, you've got all sorts of controls that look quite different from machines just a few years earlier, right? So if you're not sure what something does, you check the manual, right? And this, of course, this machine has any number of features to it, and if you're not familiar with it, you want to take a look at it. What to mention? Here's an example of this, right? So this, when you open the machine, you see the spool holder sitting here, and you fold it down in order to use it, and we will. We're going to be putting some thread. I want to see what it's doing. The owner told me that they had she had been using the machine and it was performing okay, but there were a few things it was not doing well. Maybe a little sluggish at times. So we're going to take a look at that. But I want to get a baseline. I'm going to, because I know this machine is operable, it's not frozen. If it were, I'd be a lot more cautious. I'm still going to be extra careful with the controls again, because again, the controls should be moving, but there could be a control that the owner was not using recently, and I want to make sure that we're okay with that. So you have everything from needle position on this inner control. We'll leave it at center. And then here, we've got everything starting at 0, and then we have our zigzag control. One of the things that, getting back to the point of this video, that make these machines more costly is because, for example, some of the machines have a deck here that you can remove this top to get into the mechanism in the free arm in order to service it, clean it, and oil it. Well, I can remove this plate, but I'm going to have to come in at a different angle because FOF does not let you access the top. This is metal. It's like I say, it's it's not a lightweight machine. It's about the same weight, I would say, as those Kenmores from the 70s that many of you guys are big fans of. Now, at first glance, let's say you were looking at this machine, you were thinking about purchasing it. I see some lint in here. The machine needs servicing, right? It gets used. When it gets used, the client is a sewer, and anyway, you have lots of different controls, but this just getting to them, and I'll show you another example. I'm going to move the machine so you can see it from the side, and you'll see, of course, you can control the stitch tension. The upper tension is controlled here. Right? Well, I've got to get back here and I've got to go inside. I've got to get in there to check it out, make sure it's cleaned. I've been able to access it and so forth. And that's a function. You don't see screws on the top, so you think, okay, how do I get the lid off? So I have to investigate that. How do we get this off without harming the machine? It may be a very simple thing, but again, the manufacturers, by the time we get into the 80s, which I believe this machine is, late 70s, early 80s, they've already made it more difficult, right? So it's not as simple as undoing some screws and taking the top off and going at it. It's going to take longer, right? It doesn't mean it's super hard, but it's just going to take longer. And of course, you've got a your pressure bar release is on the back. It's a good size one. It is plastic. So again, if this piece were stiff, you want to be extra careful. What else to show you? We're going to come around the back side because I want you to see the back. As far as I know, this is a very high quality machine. What do I mean by that? I mean it makes gorgeous stitches. There's a reason that FOFs, particularly vintage FOFs, are popular. Why people really like them. Again, this was made in West Germany, so it's a German-made FOF. This is before they outsourced and moved production to China. FOF was sold. It's not even the same company anymore. I'm talking about the current FOFs. And the printing on this little plate is a little strange. I'm going to see if I can kind of, where are you, plate? Here we go. If I tilt it in the light, you can probably read it a little better. It says, double insulated, do not earth, meaning do not try to ground it separately. Shows you the lamp maximum wattage, 15 watts. That's not a surprise. And I see it's rated at 1. Boy, that's tough to read, even just looking at it without the camera. 1.35 amps, kind of an odd amperage. But anyway, it's a significant motor, right? Well, guess what? If you look really closely, guys, you'll see. Let me get that. That close-up was too much. You'll notice I don't see an access panel or a screw, right? There's one on the side here, right? There's one right here, so I can take this off, and then I should be able to take this side panel off where the hand wheel is in order to get to the belts and the motor. But again, it's not as simple as some of the other machines. It's very possible, as I investigate, I may have to, and I've had to do this on virtually every Bernina I've ever serviced, most of them except the 117s, you'll notice that there are access screws underneath here. So now I'm going to have to separate the body from the base, right? The base is just a big plate, but I've got to separate that in order to get access to the motor so I can check its brushes. One of the most important things you'll ever do when you're inspecting a sewing machine motor, obviously any dust or anything that's on there should be removed. I don't typically see a ton of dust because these are covered well, but again, just getting to the motor takes more time. And then of course it all has to be put back. And I want to inspect that as part of it. Like I said, we're going to do a test run, see how it's working, what's not doing. But then again, you know, got to clean the commutator, check the brushes. That's the primary thing. If there's a lubrication point on that motor, it's going to need something on the bearings if it's allowed. At this point, some of the motors have sealed bearings and you can't lubricate them. But here you can see it's printed here, made in West Germany. And another thing to note, I once restored an older FOF free arm, and it was those beautiful gray and cream colored FOFs that had decorative stitches, not unlike this model. And you could take off the lid on that. I think it was a FOF 332, I believe. I need to go back and look at my own videos to remember which one it was. And that machine had all of its decorative stitches with buttons here, right? And they almost look like typewriter connections and keys. But this is a modern version of that, but it's still the same engineering principle that FOF used. And these machines work very well, and it's not that hard to service these keys. But what is hard is if they are stuck, because this design, the way you access decorative stitches, and you guys have seen singers, and there's all kinds of different ways to do it, depending on the engineer's creation. But if a FOF decorative stitch machine from this era, if they get stuck, getting them unstuck can be a real pain. Now, hopefully, I have no reason to think this machine was ever stored in an attic. That 332 I restored several years ago. I think I do have a video on that. That machine, it took me a full week to get its decorative stitches unstuck, and that was because it had been put in an attic for 20 years. It's a miracle that the thing ever ran again, but I did get it to run again. It was beautiful. It was almost unused. But again, this is another area. Going back to this here, if you leave this open, you think, oh, well, I got my thread on there, and you go to put the lid on, this will block it. And if you don't know that, and you're trying to put the lid on, and you think, well, hey, maybe I'm just not using enough force. Stop right there, because you will damage the cover, or you could damage this. So again, whenever you're getting a machine, this is true of all machines, even singers, vintage singers, you always want to take your time and get used to how the machine operates. And as you get further away from, say, the 40s, and you get into the 50s, 60s, 70s, and then in the 80s, you will discover that the machines are even more complex. The European machines hide a lot of things aesthetically, but getting to them for maintenance can be a pain. And so, I have to charge more because it's going to take more time. That's just been my experience with any European brand that I mentioned at the beginning of the video, right? So you have the ability to wind a bobbin up here. You have all kinds of features. These machines are quite strong. They make gorgeous stitches, and you will find a lot of people who love vintage FOFs. Now, this machine already it is almost all metal, but it's not complete. This is it falls into the hybrid category. It's strong, but there are going to be some nylon components in here, and those we have to be extra careful of, right? You don't want to expose them to heat or petroleum solvents if you can possibly help it. And that doesn't mean that they're broken. In fact, this machine could continue sewing for many years. But again, it's something to be aware of when you are looking at European vintage. I mean, 80s is vintage, right? But it's part of the hybrid era. But this machine has, like I say, it has a great following. But again, when all is said and done, if you were to compare this to any of the multi-stitch models that were made by the Japanese or the Americans, into the 50s and 60s, they don't take me as long on average. There's always going to be exceptions, right? If you have a potted motor Singer, the 201s, the 15s, the 1591s, yeah, those motors take so much time that they they make for a long restoration, I have to charge more for those. But on average, your typical Singers and the Japanese copies, they're not going to take as long, you know, apples to apples, as one of these European machines will. And that's just the way it is. It's true of Berninas, Pfaffs, many of the Neckies that came after the BU series, and it's just something to think about. So if you are dedicated and you're a Pfaff lover, or a Bernina or what have you, they are magnificent machines. The purpose of the video is not to diss the machine's quality in terms of its stitching, but it's simply to mention that if you buy one and you're trying to say, well, you're getting it, it looks in good shape, it was kept indoors, but oh, you know, mom or grandma hasn't sewn on it for 20 years and, you know, it probably needs a tune-up. You really want to stop and think, okay, how much is that tune-up going to cost? And what are you going to get for the tune-up? You know, what are you getting? So I'm going to go through and kind of assess the machine, and then I'll let the owner know, you know, if there's anything major going on with it before I do the full overhaul. But that's it. The Pfaff 1222E is a great example, but Berninas and other European brands, just keep in mind, the cost of servicing these, overhauling them, getting parts for them, can be higher, sometimes a good bit higher, 40% higher, you know, 35-40% higher than it is for other brands. And but that doesn't mean you shouldn't have one. These machines make gorgeous stitches. They're very strong sewers. And people who love Pfaffs and people who love Berninas, they really love them. It's, you know, there's a reason these brands have a dedicated following. But again, if you're out there looking for sewing machines and you're thinking a German or a Swiss machine would be great, they are great, but you need to budget, and keep this in mind when you are deciding on making an offer. If someone has a price, they may have a great price on it. It may be a good buy, but you really want to contemplate that, because if you're not going to do the overhaul yourself, you really need to find out, you know, go ahead and check around before you buy it. Ask, what will it cost to have it, you know, basically overhauled and ready to sew again? It typically will cost more, but you may say, well, heck, I want one anyway. But anyway, guys, appreciate you all watching, and stay tuned for more videos as we get into the very end of summer. I guess, well, we're officially in fall now. Take care, everyone.